Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. Show notes for this episode can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E206. Please do us a super quick favor. Do yourself a favor. Hit the subscribe button, the plus sign, the follow button, whatever it looks like in your podcast platform of choice. Or if you're watching us on video on YouTube, that's awesome too. But take just a second to subscribe to that so you don't forget to see anything else coming up. And, it tells those platforms you're listening. And that's a really, really good thing for this show. Onward with today's episode. And I'm really excited to talk about today's episode because this is actually one of the things I end up talking about with coaching clients the most. In fact, it was a couple of days ago that I was presenting a presentation to a group of real estate investors for their monthly RIA meeting. And as I was getting to these slides in my presentation, I thought, this is so important. I don't know why I'm not talking about this more. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And that is the difference between two different things that we need to gather from sellers. And both things start with the letter I, but they're two very different things. One is kind of obvious that we think about a lot, but the other one is where we're going to focus our time. The first I word is information, and the second I word is insight. So picture yourself maybe, or at least sort of a prototypical, stereotypical real estate investor. When the seller calls or when they go to a seller meeting, they either maybe literally, but certainly figuratively, metaphorically, kind of have this clipboard in front of them, right? And the clipboard's got like a checklist, and it's like, all right, here's all the information I need to gather. You're like, okay, how old is the roof? And what exactly are the rents? And when was the last time you had the HVAC serviced? And has the sewer line been rebuilt at all? And it's a 90-year-old house, those types of questions. And it can actually feel to the seller kind of like an interrogation, right? If they feel like they're going through a checklist. But all this stuff on the checklist is important information. Now, information is like, data points. But what is insight by comparison to information? So if information is quantitative, you might say, if it's just simple facts, insights are more qualitative. Insights are about not just the information, but how does somebody feel about that information? How do they perceive that information? And I will tell you that it's really natural for us as real estate investors to go in and collect information. But what we need to be doing is focusing so much more, also, not instead of, but also on collecting insight. And we can't really have too much, probably, information. We definitely can't have too much insight. And I think that one of the major points I want you to walk away with here is that we need to collect way, 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 way more insight than we tend to be collecting now, because it's not something we've been trained on until this podcast, but now hopefully it'll start to become something that's a little bit more natural. So in this podcast, I want to give you a few examples of information and insight, but we're going to focus more on insight and give you some examples and sort of distinguish between the two things and help you see how important it is to collect both, but especially to focus on insights. And then when we get to the end, I want to focus on one really, really, really important takeaway about the collection of insights. So let's just jump in and talk about a few things that we have to discuss with sellers when we get a new seller lead. So one of the things that naturally comes up, of course, is we were trying to get an understanding of the condition of the property that we are interested in buying. In our case, as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, this is the property we sent them a letter about. So we want to get a sense for condition of the property, right? So that's where this is very much the checklist thing, right? We grab the clipboard and we're like, okay, when was the roof replaced? What type of plumbing do you have? Is it galvanized? Is it PEX? Is it, whatever it is? What does the panel look like? What brand is the panel? Has the panel been updated? How big is the service? These are the types of things that we tend to ask. And sure, it's not like they're not important. They are important. But there's this whole other side of this topic of condition, which is the insight side of the topic of condition. How does the seller feel about the condition of these items? what do they perceive about the condition of their property? Let me give you a simple example that is probably the exact opposite, definitely going to be the exact opposite of what you're going to expect me to say here in this story. And so I got a call from a seller one day who I'd sent a letter, and she gave me a call, and we had a nice initial conversation. And, as is my particular way and advice for coaching clients, I try to not stay on the phone too long, because I want to get face to face with somebody. But it's also awkward if you try to jump off the phone too fast and they feel like you're cutting them short, right? So it's sort of have this natural conversation on the phone, but don't try to accomplish too much on the phone. Try to accomplish more in person and try to just make the phone call about setting up the meeting. And so in doing that, we set up the meeting. The seller, I noticed that her kind of verbal posture, maybe you'd say, is that she was really kind of ashamed of the condition of the property. She said, I used to live here. My mom and I actually lived in this house together. And we moved out about 3 years ago into a different place. And that's been great. And then we've been renting it, but the renters, they have not taken care of it. And it's really upsetting to me. It's really gone downhill. And so I just want you to know before I meet you there, it's been a rental these last couple of years, and I don't feel great about the condition of it. So I thought, okay, so what she did, sometimes you hear me talk about framing and pre-framing. She pre-framed me of exactly what to expect. And so I had the vision in my mind that was exactly the picture that she painted. And, so we meet at the property, and she's about to open the front door, and you can just sort of like see on her face, she's like bracing herself for impact. Her shoulders are kind of shrugged up. She's like, okay, just a reminder, the tenants have been here and it's not great. I'm like, okay, no problem. And she opens the door and we walk in, and I'm looking around this place going, are you kidding? Like, this looks not like a big deal to me at all. I'm thinking, wow, all of these things that she's perceiving as being really flawed are things I'm like, we could knock this out in a weekend with like $5,000 tops of a simple kind of a renovation. But it didn't matter what I thought. It mattered what she thought. And by comparison, to what her standard was like when she lived there and took care of this place meticulously with love, it was a wreck. But to me, I was like, oh my gosh, no, this isn't a wreck at all. So it was extremely important for me to understand that she thought this was bad, because then as I chatted with her and negotiated, I can now frame things in the language of my audience, in the language of the seller, in alignment with how she sees things, right? And now, instead of me, I certainly didn't say, are you kidding? This is totally fine. Don't even worry about it. I said, I can see what you mean. I'm sure that I see some things here that the tenants probably didn't take care of as well as you did. And I understand that must be frustrating. And so I can use that language as we continue to develop rapport. There are other types of sellers, like on this topic of condition, you'll get insights from them that kind of imply how they see their product compared to the other ones available perhaps on the market, right? So you'll have a seller say, yeah, the roof is probably on its last 5 years, but if you look at the other houses for sale around here too, none of them have new roofs either. That's an insight, right? The roof is, say, 25 of 30 years old. That's the information. But the insight is, this old roof doesn't matter in my ability to sell this property. And that insight is absolutely critical in order to understand who you're dealing with, understand their frame of mind, their perspective. Because ultimately, as we make a proposal, we have to align our proposal with their worldview, so to speak, with their perspective. So what's another thing that we are very naturally inclined to talk about with sellers? Nobody forgets in the real estate investing community to talk about price. So what's the information side of price, right? Well, the information side of price is, here's the price I want. Here's how I came up with that. Here are the other properties in this area that sold for these prices, and this is how I arrived at mine. So price is information, but even some of the thought process about how they arrived at price, that's insight in and of itself, right? Because now you're seeing if they're saying, oh, well, here's this address and this address and this address. These sold for $379 roughly. So I think mine is probably a little bit better than that. So I'm thinking $399. People will outline that type of rationale for us. And that is insight. Now we know that they perceive, they believe, they feel that their property is like this one, but they think it's actually a little bit better. Great. That understanding that point of reference is absolutely critical. The other side of price, though, that is absolutely an insight is when they start talking about price, we need to be gathering insights about what do they perceive as happening kind of with the market? What do they perceive is happening with the economy as a whole? So you can be talking to two sellers with houses that are next door to each other, that are virtually identical and for all intents and purposes. And you have one seller who's giving you insight that says, yeah, we think about selling the property, but it just doesn't seem like a good time. It seems like it's a tough market. I mean, obviously the economy is headed in the wrong direction. And so I don't know, I'm a little pessimistic about my ability to sell this property. And then 5 minutes later, you can have the same conversation with this seller from next door. And that person is saying, yeah, well, as you know, though, as I sell this property, I've got lots of options because this is a great neighborhood. People love it. There's always demand in this neighborhood. And interest rates have been a little high for the last, few months. But obviously, in January, as we enter an election year, those interest rates are going to go down. They'll say something like that, right? I'm just making up these two examples. But the point is that every human being, which a seller is a human being, right? Every human being has got a different perspective. They've got a different, unique to them worldview. They see the context of their property differently than the person next door. And if we don't know what that context is, we are really just like blindfolded, throwing darts at a board. And that's not an advisable way to go because we don't know how to frame our proposal, right? And the first person, we're gonna frame our proposal totally different than the second person because they think of things differently. So we're going to use different word choice, and we're going to just position the whole thing in a different way because it has to match how they think, and they think very, very differently. Let's talk about a third topic that we certainly don't tend to forget about when we are talking to sellers and gathering information, and that's rents, right? Especially people in this community, I'm almost entirely doing my thoughtful marketing to the absentee owners, the owners of rental properties. I'm very rarely personally marketing to owner occupants. So rents are 99.9% of the time something I'm going to be talking about with my particular sellers. So what's the information in rents? Well, the information in rent is what is the rent, right? But the insight is, what do you think of your rents? How do you feel about your rents? How do you feel about your tenants, right? So it's pretty classic, fairly consistent, not universal, of course, but fairly predictable. If a seller says, my rent is $13.95, but we're low. It could be higher, right? That's a typical stance that sellers have, a posturing, a positioning of their message, but it's not entirely universal. But when a seller says that, I'm never the least bit surprised, and I doubt you are either. So the insight comes from, well, okay, so what is it you feel like they should be? And if the seller says, $14.95, now we just got an insight about what they think the rental market is. They said they're at $13.95. They feel like they're low. They think it should be $14.95. Now, it's possible I agree that it should be $14.95. It's possible I think it should be $10.95, and they're already out, overachieving. But it's also possible that I think it should be $18.95. So this is an insight about their calibration to the rental market, because as in real estate investing professionals like we are, we tend to be, if we're paying attention, right, we're not asleep at the wheel. We tend to have a pretty good sense for what market rents should be, and we should definitely have a pretty darn good sense for what market rents should be. But now we're trying to get a sense for what they think market rents are. And I got to say, as a buyer, I love it when the seller says, yeah, my rents are low, $13.95. They should be $14.95. And I'm thinking they should be $18.95. That creates opportunity. But now, because we have that insight, we can have that conversation and say, yeah, I see what you mean, Bob. I agree. Your rents are low. They could be a little bit higher. I'm going to do my math. I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do my own analysis based on the idea that at some point in the near future, I can get these to $14.95, even though I know there's a path to me getting them to, say, $18.95. So we need to know what they think about their rents. The other thing that this talking about rents tends to unveil for us on the insight side of things is, how do they feel about their tenants themselves? How do they feel about that relationship with them? This is as they talk about their rents, especially if they say, yeah, our rents are a little bit low, it's usually comma. And then the rest of the sentence could be like, because, they've been there a long time and we just really like them. They're such a nice, sweet family. They kind of remind us of ourselves when we were their age, and we just don't have the heart to raise the rents on them. That's a very common thing to hear. The information is, here's the rent. The insight is, we are softies as landlords. The insight is, we don't want to see these people get displaced if we sell the property. The insight is, we have consciously traded off more money. We have not tried to juice the most money out of this because we care about the human side of things. These are insanely valuable insights that we need to have as we move forward in our negotiation, so that we can speak the language of our seller. We can frame our proposition, our proposal, in the way that they aligns with how they see things. So those are just some examples. We could go on for days. I mean, really days, because insights are practically infinite. And like I said at the beginning, you can't have too many insights, too much insight. And we probably should, as a general rule, demand that we collect a lot more insights before we ever make a proposal, right? Making quick proposals. This is one of the things that I think is, well, you can't really make a quick proposal. You can make a quick offer, but a proposal it needs to bake in the oven a little bit longer. And we can't possibly have too much insight, and we can very often have way too little insight. So my encouragement to you is take the time, but open up your ears and eyes to gather way more insight. But here is the secret takeaway that hopefully isn't quite such a secret, but a point I want to make so insanely clearly for you here as we wrap up this episode. Information, because it's factual, is very transactional. You could send somebody an email or a text message, heaven forbid, that says, bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's the age of the roof? What type of plumbing is it? Has the sewer line been replaced? Whatever. But insights require interaction with, oh, look at that, a third I word, interaction. Insights require interaction. And that interaction, you could say, well, email's an interaction, but not in the way that we're talking about it. A phone call is a type of interaction, but it's if a factual transactional transmission of information back and forth is one-dimensional, a phone call is two-dimensional, but an in-person meeting with them is absolutely three-dimensional. And an in-person meeting in their own home is like 20-dimensional, right? If that's a thing. 20-dimensional, because their home is an insight-rich environment. It is the richest environment for insights that exists, because this is where they live. This is where they display who they are. This is where you see the bumper sticker about this presidential candidate, and you see the sports thing on the wall about this particular school, and you see the clues everywhere about things that matter to them, and the religious symbols in there, and the type of magazines sitting on the coffee table. And are they buying, $3 a pound coffee, or are they buying $30 a pound coffee? These are insights as they go to serve you the coffee, and you taste it and you're like, wow, that tastes like, this is amazing. Do you own your own farm in Costa Rica? Holy smokes, this is incredible. Versus this is some $3 Folgers kind of thing that they're making. Like, those things tell you about them. And we don't get that unless we are with them. We don't get that unless we're with them face to face. We don't get that unless we're with them face to face in their own environment. And their home is an insight-rich environment. We are detectives just trying to gather as many insights as we can. It looks like we're gathering information. On the outside, it kind of looks like we're just gathering information. But secretly behind the scenes, we're gathering insights, and that is the single most important thing that we can do. So that is it for today's episode of racking up rentals. Got really fired up in that one. This is such an insanely important topic. And I'm glad we're finally doing an episode specifically about this. Again, show notes can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E206. Please do us a big favor by hitting that subscribe button. Even better if you'd like to help us out. A show like this does take some work. The best thing you can do to, say thank you is to rate and review the show. Like if you could go to someplace like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, just give it a 5-star rating if you feel like we've earned it. Write a sentence or two telling the world what you think. That is so appreciated and truly, truly helps us here on the podcast as well. Did you know we have a Facebook group for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs? It's true. It's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders. We'd love to have you hang out with us over there. You can just go to group.thoughtfulre.com if you would like, or search Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders in Facebook. But either way, hit that blue button that says join. We'd love to get to hang out with you there too. As you've probably noticed, there's not the greater real estate investing world is not talking about things like we're talking about them in the way that we're talking about them. So if this approach resonates with you, join that community, because that's our clubhouse to talk about all this stuff. I will see you in the next episode next Thursday. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off.